All right, so today we're going to talk about some more, general stuff related to the brain. We're going to discuss some brain pathologies, and then we're going to talk about the structures of the spinal cord, which many of you are well aware by now already. So, different aspects of consciousness. So, people who are conscious perceive and interpret sensations, control their movement, and exhibit high mental processing capacities, effectively the analytical skills. So consciousness is considered to have 4 different grades that span from alertness to coma. As you go from alertness to lethargy to stupor to coma, the ability of a person to consciously perceive sensations and analyze the information and voluntarily respond to those signals progressively decreases. When people are fully alert, large parts of the cortex are simultaneously engaged. As you can imagine, that includes sensations, somatosensory, visual, auditory, and so on cortices, motor responses to those stimuli, and activity in the prefrontal cortex, which implies our conscious responses. Now, when we faint, we briefly lose consciousness. Most frequently, fainting is caused by the reduced blood flow to a certain region of the brain. Neurons aren't great at functioning without a steady supply of nutrients and, most importantly, oxygen. So when the supply is cut, they shut down. One good example is orthostatic hypotension, when people stand up or you stand up and become lightheaded. Or another example, if you watch some action movies, like seriously, like B-type movies, when one character presses on the carotid arteries of another on the neck, and that other character passes out, that can be done. You block the blood flow to the brain. Now, coma isn't a deep sleep. It's a long-term unresponsiveness to any stimuli. You don't need to know the exact list of causes that are presented in this list, but you have to understand it can be anything from various metabolic disorders, for instance, keto-diabetic coma, to comas that can be induced by trauma or tumors or infections, anything that affects the brain. For example, neurons aren't really great at functioning without glucose. So hypoglycemic coma, fairly common. Is fairly common. Yeah. Now, the brain activity can be measured by measuring the electrical current in the cortex. You remember that signals that are transmitted by axons are electrical in nature, right? So those electrical signals reflect the activity at synapses. You can measure this electrical activity by applying the electrodes to the scalp. Okay, you can see here. And measuring what we call brain waves. There are 4 main types of brain waves associated with a different state of alertness. Theta waves are characteristic of the states when a human being is alert, aroused, and focused on a task. Alpha waves, which, as you can see, have lower frequency, are associated with the relaxation and light trance. So basically, before you fall asleep, right before, or before you just wake up. See again? So you're not just falling asleep. You are in that pre-falling asleep stage. The question how, I don't have an answer to it. If people under hypnosis can sometimes learn things much faster than you would in your regular fully alert conscious state. But the mechanisms, I'm not going to say they are unknown. They are known to me for sure, but I seriously doubt that anyone has any exact mechanisms. Now, since our cortical activity our cortex becomes less and less active, and you can see that in case of theta waves, the frequency reduces even more, and these theta waves are associated with the dreaming sleep. Okay? I'm not going to focus on things like trance and deep meditation. We're not in Tremont or Ohio City for that matter to talk about meditation, But as we're going to chat about rapid eye movement sleep, I want you just to think that we're going to talk about sleep in a minute. But every night, you do have dreams. You may not be aware of them when you wake up. They may not leave any impressions on you, but you do have dreams. And those dreams, they occur during rapid eye movement sleep. So no wonder that still a substantial part of your cortex is active. Otherwise, how would you produce all those dreams, right? Now, most of your night is spent in dreamless sleep, or so-called non-rapid eye movement. It is characterized by delta waves, which have even lower frequency and a very much varied amplitude. Now, why do we care? Well, it turns out that the waves differ if the person is taking some kind of specific drugs or if they have some kind of a brain disorder, for example, epilepsy, or a variety of parasomnias. So you need to understand that even people in coma, they have brain waves. If even people in coma show brain waves. If there are no brain waves detected, it is a brain death, and it is irreversible. Why I focus so much on that? The rest of the body may well be functional, and the person whose brain is dead can still be on life support and physiologically be absolutely functional. In fact, if you drive to work on I-90 or I-271, you see a lot of people who obviously are brain dead, but otherwise physiologically functional. Now, that brings us to the conversation about sleep. Partial unconsciousness, obviously. You can be awakened by some kind of stimulation, for instance, the alarm clock. And there are, for different people, there are different triggers that can wake them up. Make sense? For some people, it's the sound of alarm and that's it. For other people, they cannot sleep in a complete quietness and they need something else. So there's a variety of stimuli. Okay? Now, brainstem, during the sleep, brainstem is active, which kind of makes sense because it controls all the internal organs, but the cortical activity is decreased. Okay? Now, there are two main types of sleep. Non-rapid eye movement and rapid eye movement. As we mentioned, rapid eye movement is characterized by delta waves, while all the non-rapid eye movement stages are characterized by theta waves. So let's take a look at these patterns. So this graph at the bottom, I instinctively don't like it, but let's break down what is going on here, okay? So if you look at this graph, the horizontal line shows you sleeping. So when you are awake and you fall asleep, the very first, very short stage will be stage 1 NREM, non-rapid eye movement. Then you fall to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. They're not particularly interesting, except for stage 4. Because you're just getting deeper and deeper into your sleep. Stage 4 is dominated by deltas. And this is like the deepest sleep. Okay? During that time, people can wet the bed, experience night terrors, or sleepwalk. Yes. No, we're getting there. We are getting there. Sleep paralysis doesn't happen at stage 4 because you can still move your muscles. People do the sleepwalking, right? Which they don't remember. After the REM stage 4, night terrors? Yeah, nightmares. Yeah. So after the NREM stage 4, you get here, to rapid eye movement. Okay? Now, why would it be that up high? Because in the rapid eye movement sleep, interestingly enough, the activity of your cerebral cortex, well, significant parts of it, increases. Here's what happens during the rapid eye movement sleep. You dream. And your dreams are usually fairly coherent. They may be absurd, okay? But there is some kind of a story behind them. In that story, you do something. Now, for instance, if you are dreaming about you being an absolute killing unit, and next to you is your partner, sleep paralysis is kind of a necessary thing. During the rapid eye movement sleep, your skeletal muscles that are responsible for movements, so eye movements and respiration are not included in the list, but like actual movements, those muscles are inhibited. The signals to them are blocked. So you are effectively paralyzed. Now, to your question about the sleep paralysis, let's take a look at different types of sleep disorders. So I'm going to jump straight to this. Okay? So we don't have it in the list, but imagine what's going on when you have a rapid eye movement sleep, right? All your muscles are paralyzed. Somebody wakes you up. And if the awakening of your consciousness and the awakening, quote unquote, of your muscles, if they aren't exactly synchronized, do you follow? You consciously are awake. Your muscles are still inhibited, i.e. paralyzed. Am I clear? That's the sleep paralysis. It goes away. It's not permanent. You just can't move. I can imagine. It's probably terrifying. Say again? No. It's a very short-lived condition. So it's just imagine waking up and not being able to move for some time. Yeah. Sleep paralysis. I don't have enough knowledge to judge if it's good or bad. I don't know any epidemiological data. There is a saying in Russian which can be translated to English as, there are no healthy people, there are undiagnosed. So when somebody says that they don't have a problem, it means they didn't go through the proper evaluation. Okay? No, seriously. So for instance, like restless leg syndrome. Is it associated with any mental health issues? I don't know. I don't have data. I wouldn't be surprised if it is associated.
People that got that and they don't be sleep. They just constantly.
Yes. One of my friends has restless leg syndrome. It's very aggravating. Okay? Now, insomnia doesn't need the explanation, I presume, right? Narcolepsy does. I encountered people who characterize them as narcoleptics. Okay. So, being drowsy during the day because you didn't get enough sleep is not narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is falling asleep anywhere without any control, like driving a car and happened to me when I was much younger. I fell asleep driving a car, not because I'm narcoleptic, because I slept 2-3 hours a night. I was working. So, yeah, narcolepsy is, you can't, could I stop and take a nap? I could. I decided not to, which was a mistake. But I was not narcoleptic, and I am not. It's a legitimate disorder. Well, jet lag, I'm not even going to mention. I mean, everybody knows what it is. REM, sleep disorders. So why REM? Sleepwalking is not supposed to happen because your muscles are supposed to be inhibited. And if they're not, you are walking. Are you familiar with a TV show that is over many years ago? House MD. Yeah? There is an episode when there's a case, sort of through clinical duties, of a woman who has rash on her knees and buttocks every morning. And turns out she has parasomnia, in which she walks up to her ex-apartment upstairs, has sex with him, walks back, doesn't remember anything, she appears completely, lucid to him because it's REM. Her frontal cortex activity is very high. Basically, she dreams, and she doesn't just dream, she actively implements her dream of having sex in life. Those cases were described. It is a real case. Okay? Go ahead.
I got a question. Just last week, my daughter called me in the middle of the night. I don't remember answering the phone. I don't remember the conversation. But when I woke up, I called her and asked her, did she talk to me? Because I remember talking to her. And she was like, Mom, you had a whole conversation with me. How do you not remember it?
Might have been parasomnia. REM, sleep disorder. My wife tells me that I speak when I'm asleep sometimes, and she can have a conversation with me.
Yeah, she
It's
said
completely
I
absurd,
answered questions.
but I can converse with her. Okay? Hmm? Well, my brother had PTSD because of military service. He was just yelling in his sleep. I can maintain a coherent conversation, turns out. Which is, again, she says that it's completely bonkers. The stuff that I talk about, huh? No, I haven't. But I cannot exclude that. I cannot exclude that. Okay, obstructive sleep apnea. So this is, I wouldn't call it a sleep disorder, because quite frankly, it's the disorder of respiratory cardiovascular systems, mostly respiratory. For instance, people who are overweight or especially obese may suffer from obstructive sleep apnea caused by their condition. So basically, the airflow is blocked and you wake up because you can't breathe. You don't really know about that, but it's not good for you. Circadian rhythm sleep disorder. I don't know about English, but in Russian we say that there are two types of people. There are owls and there are larks. Larks are the birds that wake up very early. Owls that go to bed late, wake up late. Okay? So you can consider it as a disorder, I would say, because our society is for people who wake up early. All this 9 to 5, all that kind of stuff. 8 a.m. classes. So you have to wake up early. Now, exploding head syndrome happens to me from time to time. I learned it, so I'm not even that much concerned anymore. I just hear
I was just about to ask you, is that really true?
What?
Going to sleep too loud noise.
No. I go to sleep. I'm falling asleep. And then I legitimately hear a very, very loud bang, which comes from the first floor. There is nothing happening. It's completely in my mind. That's exploding head syndrome.
Oh, okay.
No, it's not. No, this is just, PTSD is a much more complicated disorder, which is associated with extreme traumatic experiences. For me, just some wiring is a foul. Okay? Yes. Say again? Go ahead and grab it. I have no idea.
Why do we do what?
Twitch?
Oh.
It might, so think of it this way. Your cortices become less and less active.
I think it's because the muscles are relaxed.
Your cortices control your skeletal muscles, as we will learn pretty soon. So changes in the cortical activity may send some weird signals to your muscles, and they just twitch uncontrollably. Okay? That would be my speculation.
Especially if you're like a very active person. It's harder to...
So dreams fall into REM sleep. That's dreams.
And what about the ones that sleep where you don't have no dreams?
That's non-rapid eye movement. Everything else, pretty much. Okay, I think we mentioned memory on one occasion when we were talking about limbic system in particular, but we're going to reiterate. So first of all, we're going to talk about sort of different types of memory, okay? So the temporary storage, which sometimes is called working memory or immediate memory, is what you use in, a conversation to remember what person just said, right? So it lasts maybe minutes, okay, maybe hours. Then you forget a bunch of stuff, and whatever you did not forget forms a short-term memory, which lasts for days, okay? Now, the conversion of short-term memories into long-term can be enhanced, augmented, by three main techniques. Excitement, okay? When something really cool and exciting happened to you, It doesn't have to be positive. You could be scared to death. Okay? You usually remember that stuff. Okay? So that's excitement. Rehearsal. You know, repeat things. Pretty normal. And association of the new data with the data that you already have. In my opinion, this is one of the most critical mechanisms for augmenting long-term memory, because if you can start associating the new stuff that you learn to the stuff that you already know, so for instance, you learn about basal nuclei and you associate it with the functions of a motor cortex, it helps you to build connections between different concepts. Now, a certain chunk of your long-term memory is forgotten, obviously. Okay? Things are forgotten. Long-term memories are forgotten. Okay? Like if you will ask me to name my classmates from elementary school, I won't be able to recall the entire class. I will remember some folks, but not everybody, okay? What I find particularly interesting is this, the irretrievable data. It's been demonstrated that humans, when they are in a state of hypnosis, which is a legit thing, by the way, when they are in this state, sometimes they can recall things that they don't remember when they're in full conscience. Okay? Like pattern of cracks on the tiles in a restroom in elementary school that they attended 40 years ago. Because they just saw this pattern so many times, but it's so trivial that it didn't really stick with them. Okay? That makes sense? So, it's irretrievable. Now, that's the length. Now, what about the functional classification? So we have declarative and procedural memory. Okay? So the declarative memory is the one in which you, I don't know, memorize. I am memorizing class roster. Okay? I teach a lot of classes this semester. I suck at it because my brain is like not incorporating too many names. And even if I remember them, I will forget them. Okay? So it's totally fine when you email your instructor like a year later to ask for a reference letter, I don't know, and you start with, you probably don't remember me. We don't. We don't remember you. Introduce yourself. If you introduce yourself, we will recall. But if you say, I'm such and such, I have no idea who you are. Okay? We have a lot of people to interact with. So memorizing a phone book, nobody does it. Memorizing the roster, doing the anatomy memorization, all of that is declarative memory. Procedural memory is the skills. So if you would look where ultimately all your procedural memories are stored, it's premotor cortex, the skills cortex. Remember? If you know how to ride a bike, and you don't ride a bike, and 10 years later you get a bike, you can still ride it. Like, you're not going to be super good at this, but you can ride it. Make sense? So yeah, that's the idea in the procedural memory. So what happens? How do we form memories? Quoting Nate Bargatze in his SNL skit about George Washington, nobody knows. We know that very many different structures in the brain, from thalamus to hippocampus to prefrontal cortex, participate in the memory formation. We don't know the exact mechanism at the cellular level. We do know that gene expression changes, which may result in different number of certain proteins at synapses and receptors. Okay? Changes in the synaptic strand, so how effectively the signal is transmitted. Think of it this way, folks. Imagine your favorite song. You heard it for the first time one day, right? And then you heard it again and again and again. And then at some point, you don't really need to hear that song. You can, I'm not saying you can sing it, but you can sing it in your brain. You can imagine that song playing in your brain, because that repetition resulted in the long-term potentiation of certain synapses. Okay? Now we get into real fun stuff. What? Favorite song?
Where you learn music like that? Because we used to actually listen to it and write the words down.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about even words. I'm talking about the sound, the everything, okay? Words is declarative. Memorizing words is a declarative memory, okay? Like, I'm bragging, but when I was a teenager, I was a big The Beatles fan. I knew all their songs by heart. I could write every song by heart. I don't anymore. I don't listen to them. I can sing along to many of them, but... So let's talk about fun stuff, which is brain trauma. Several types. TBI, traumatic brain injury. Remember that the layer of cerebrospinal fluid is very thin. So if your skull stops, your brain keeps moving, you get a coup injury, and your brain hits the skull. And then it bounces back, and you get a counter coup injury. Okay? So concussions are cumulative. Not just may have, they are cumulative, which means if you get hit in the head over and over, the damage accumulates, it never resolves completely. Does that make sense? So CTE in football players, they being hit in the head very often. I have not heard of any CTEs in punters or kickers.
No, because they don't get hit.
They don't get hit. Yeah. You know? So, for example, the American soccer, so I don't remember the exact name of that association that regulates all the youth soccer in the United States. When our kids were playing soccer, they banned headers for everyone under the age of 12 or 13, I don't remember from the top of my head, because it's a microconcussion, and they are cumulative. If concussion is severe and the brain is actually bruised, we call it a contusion. Okay? Now, the hit in the head may not only cause concussion, but can also pop some vessels. Okay? If these vessels bleed between the dura mater and the arachnoid mater in the subdural space, we call it subdural hemorrhage. If they bleed into subarachnoid space, well, call it subarachnoid hemorrhage. You can go ahead.
Why is shaking baby syndrome not on the traumatic brain injury?
It can be.
Oh, okay.
Because if you shake the baby,
That's the coup in the...
that, yes, they can be coup, counter coup, yes.
Okay.
And that can, yes, that can lead to, yes. Concussion has forever consequences. So let's say brain's damaged, but it's not healed completely, and then you overlay damage, and overlay damage, and overlay damage more and more and more. Does that make sense? So they add up. Cumulative is adding up. Okay. So another option is, well, an option, subarachnoid hemorrhage, in which blood accumulates in subarachnoid space. In both cases, the pressure inside of the cranium increases. Brain gets compressed, and that not the brain has to be removed surgically. You have to understand. The hemorrhage has to be eliminated surgically. Okay? So it can aggravate any other injury that you may incur. Cerebrovascular accidents. I did not look at the latest statistics, but it's either the 5th or the 6th most common cause of death. Okay. In terms of disease, not like car crashes or murders or whatever, suicides. Stroke is the 5th or 6th most common cause of death. Okay. There are two types of stroke. One is ischemic, in which one of the arteries that supply brain is blocked by a clot. So neurons do not receive the blood supply, which means they do not receive glucose and oxygen, and they die. Neurons, for our intents and purposes, do not divide. So no new cells are formed, and you're just left with less neurons. Depending on the area that is damaged, people with stroke may have different symptoms. Most frequently, it is the frontal lobe motor cortices. So people would exhibit paralysis, impaired eye movements, and slurred speech, but there are recorded strokes in the brainstem, and that's uniformly lethal because your brainstem dies. You cannot control your internal organs.
So you're saying that one happened, that specific stroke?
Ischemic stroke is because of occlusion.
Yeah, but what side of the brain it happen on any side or?
Say again? It can happen on left or right side, front, middle, and back, anywhere. Most frequent is middle cerebral artery, which supplies motor cortices. That's just most frequent. Okay? Now, in hemorrhagic stroke, which is less common, about 30%, there is a weakening of the aortic wall called aneurysm. Right here. That weakening is ruptured and the blood spills into the brain. It's called hemorrhage. Usually aneurysms can be genetic, can be caused by hypertension. You were saying? Well, they may kill you, yes. And people who live with aneurysms and are diagnosed, the biggest problem is the spike in the blood pressure. Because if the blood pressure goes up, the weak wall of the artery can't keep up with it, ruptures, and there is a stroke.
Okay, what's considered mini strokes that you can have that you may
Yes.
not know you have?
So mini stroke is what you call a transient cerebrovascular accident, TCVA. Yes. So it means usually not that you have a clot, but blood vessels that supply your brain get constricted for a short period of time. So they don't shut off the supply completely for an extended time. They reduce that supply for a short period of time. So some of your brain cells die. May not be enough to have any symptoms. But eventually, it's not good.
Yeah, a couple of
Yes, of course, because you have, let's say, I'm making numbers up. Let's say you have 1 billion neurons. And if somebody has those mini strokes, you kill 10 here, 10 there, 10 here, 10 there, you know? So, and they don't come back. So that's it. Okay? Now, let's talk about some cool brain diseases. First is Alzheimer's, and I have good news for everybody in this room. Huh? What? Wait, what? I have great news. No, everybody's going to have it. Everybody in this room in the future is going to have Alzheimer's. The biggest question is what's going to happen first? The onset of the disease or death of natural causes? Okay? I will have it, yeah. If I will die first, I will not. But my point is, Alzheimer's is the disease of old age.
Right.
We're not supposed to live 80 years. We're supposed to die in our max early 30s, producing some babies. Okay? That's it. Dementia is a general term that is associated with the cognitive decline. Alzheimer's is one of the types of dementia because it is characterized by these two proteins, beta amyloid and the tau. Beta amyloid protein forms aggregates that are called plaques, while tau protein forms fibril forms, neurofibrils. Both plaques and fibrils disrupt the structure of neurons and basically make them dysfunctional. Now, what happens in Alzheimer's anatomically? On the left, you can see a healthy brain with a lot of cortical matter, all great. On the right is advanced Alzheimer's disease. You can see how much the cortical matter shrunk. Okay? Cortex is what makes you, lucid. So you're not anymore. Now, those are all symptoms which are pretty general for all dementias. Okay? Issue. But the good question is what can precipitate Alzheimer's. So the first answer, the quick answer, we don't really know. But since my main interest is microbiology, I follow this. I'm going to give you 3 studies. Well, 4 actually. Study 1 was done on people who had early and late onset of Alzheimer's. People who had early onset of Alzheimer's had much higher rate of herpes virus infection, cold sores. Yeah, so people who have herpes simplex virus, the one that causes cold sores, or genital herpes, they have higher risk for developing Alzheimer's early. Then there was a fantastic study when 2 very age-close, 2 populations that are very close in age, older people, like 60, 70 something. 2 populations were compared. One population received shingles vaccine, and another one didn't. Well, guess what? People who received shingles vaccine showed about 30% lower chances of developing dementia than people who didn't. No, that's different. Shingles is basically chickenpox for adults. Okay? Yeah. So, that's another study. The third study that would fall into that category, so I don't know if it's still ongoing, but there was a study at Columbia University Medical Center in New York. They gave people with Alzheimer's a drug that blocks herpes viruses. Herpes simplex, chickenpox, they're all herpes viruses. Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But levels depend, okay? The rate of, I don't want to get into the whole herpes physiology, but it's very cool. I worked on them. But turns out that anti-herpes drug slows down the progression of Alzheimer's. Now, to conclude this a little bit more relevant. So, is anyone here planning to go into dental hygiene? Okay. So, basically, you will brush people's teeth in a very fancy way. Well, yeah, but you're probably familiar with a condition known as gingivitis.
Right.
One of the causes of it is bacteria called Fusobacterium necrophorum. Whatever, doesn't matter. Gingivitis. Mice were infected with that bacteria, and later that bacteria was found in their brain, and the changes in the brain were identical to the changes that happen during the development of Alzheimer's disease.
They said that the bacteria is attacking conjunctivitis.
So the idea is that it's a hypothesis. But the hypothesis, the working hypothesis now, is that beta amyloid and tau proteins are protective. When there is some pathogen in your brain, they form those plaques and fibrils that wall off the pathogen from the rest of the brain and don't let it spread. But the collateral damage is that this part of the brain becomes effectively dysfunctional. The more infections you have, the greater the collateral damage. So, brush your teeth, folks. Okay? Mm-hmm. Oh, it can vary. As far as I don't know the proper, classification. I know that like some people develop it very early in 50s and 60s, and that's considered early onset. 80s.
Can being pregnant also activate like a sign of Alzheimer's dementia?
Unless you can think of someone who's like.
Because they say you sometimes lose your memory.
No, not really. Not really, no. Huh?
What is tau protein?
One of the proteins normally present in the brain. But if it changes...
That's not even an American word.
Tau? It's a Greek word. Tau. It's a Greek letter. Okay? Don't ask me about what... The protein naming in biochemistry is absolutely wild. Trust me. Okay. You're probably going to see patients with Alzheimer's. You're probably going to see patients with Parkinson's disease.
Yes.
So, remember we were talking about the brainstem. And we mentioned the part of the midbrain called substantia nigra. It produces neurotransmitter called dopamine. What are you looking for? Oh. When this dopamine that is released by midbrain reaches basal nuclei and makes them releasing inhibition from your muscles so you can move. Well, if the neurons that produce dopamine are destroyed, dead, for some reason, that dopamine, well, isn't produced, the inhibition by basal nuclei stays in place and people develop hypokinesia. Parkinson's is a disease of too little movement. There's no cure. Treatments include the agonists of dopamine receptors and the precursors for dopamine such as L-DOPA, but it's a progressive one. What I want you to understand is that unlike Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease does not affect cognitive capacities. People are absolutely lucid. Okay? Now, and then there's Huntington's disease. So this is one of the most terrifying diseases in my opinion. Okay? So on the image to your right, you can see, I'm trying to get something brighter than that. So these structures that I circle represent the activity of basal nuclei, the parts of the cerebrum that achieve controllers of your movement. So you can see that in healthy folks it's pretty active, and the advanced symptomatic Huntington's disease is pretty much gone. So what's going on? The protein called Huntington, when there's a mutation in this gene of Huntington, this abnormal protein accumulates and shuts down basal nuclei. When basal nuclei are shut down, inhibition of unnecessary movements stops, and people develop hyperkinesia, also known as chorea. Huntington's disease is uniformly fatal and incurable. Well, I'm going to take my words back. There was a report. I did not investigate that report. Recent, last week, I think. Yeah, that gene therapy, they cured one person from Huntington's disease. I didn't have time to take a look at it.
1 out of a million?
Well, Huntington's disease, in the first place, is very rare. It's rare. And this is what I wanted to talk about a little bit. So I'm just going to use this white space to illustrate my point. So Huntington's disease is a genetic disorder. So it's autosomal dominant. Now, no insult to anyone. I don't expect you to immediately realize, oh, that means that. So what does that mean? Imagine that the Huntington's gene is H. Okay? So the normal gene is the lowercase h. The abnormal gene is uppercase H. If somebody has two abnormal genes, this condition, to my knowledge, is embryonically lethal, so embryo does not survive.
Right.
So people who actually have this disease, since it's dominant, the bad gene dominates the good gene. So this is the sick person. Now, you may wonder, how does that condition remain in the population if people die? Well, the onset starts in late 30s. No, late 20s, sorry. Late 20s, early 30s. Way past the time when we reach reproductive age. So now imagine that someone doesn't know that they have the mutant gene. So they marry another person who doesn't. No, who doesn't. Say they don't have mutant gene. That's healthy person on the right. So their offspring can have one of two genotypes. One is this, and one is this. And it's 50-50. So if that person doesn't know that they have that gene, they may pass that gene to their offspring. And it's literally genetic coin flip, whether or not you have it. And imagine learning that one of your parents have it, going to the geneticist, and receiving, you absolutely healthy, like you say, you 18, 19, 20, whatever. And you receive the result of your test that shows that you have the mutant gene. Which means in 20 to 25 years you're going to be dead. And the death is not going to be overnight. It will be long and excruciating passing. That's pretty bad. Okay? So genetic testing is useful. Let's put it this way. Okay? Now, you may see a person with Huntington's disease. If you work as a nurse and one of your patients has this condition, I would appreciate if you call me. I am willing to go to jail for HIPAA violation, but I want to meet that person. There are single-digit cases in the United States, one of the coolest neurological diseases. We all have proteins called prions in our brain. These prions can go from normal to abnormal. These abnormal prions accumulate in your brain and turn it, not literally, but almost, into a sponge. The general name for those pathologies is the spongiform encephalopathy, sponge-like brain disease. What's cool about that is that when an abnormal and a normal prion proteins interact, the abnormal one turns the normal one into the bad guy. So it's a chain reaction. So symptoms, progressive neurological deterioration, There is absolutely no cure or treatment. Treatment is entirely palliative. Just, take away the suffering. Up until 2018, I believe, or 2019, there was no test. So diagnosis was post-mortem. The person dies, they open up the brain, slice it, put it under the microscope and say, oh, it was a prion disease. Now they can diagnose it using the lumbar puncture, which I don't think makes it any easier, because you're like, dude, your neurological problems is that you have Creutzfeldt-Jacobs, you have 6 months to live, and it's going to be shit. That's pretty rough, right? Now, where does it come from? So, the classic CJD comes from the consumption of nervous tissue of animals that have it as well. Probably have heard about the mad cow disease.
Yes.
People who ate that meat. Many years later, got Creutzfeldt-Jacobs. The incubation period is super long. Huh? Just the brain. Well, meat also, because you can't really separate nerves from the meat, so you can eat some neurons, In the US, this animal condition is called the wasting disease of deer. It is not common, to my knowledge, not in Ohio. It was detected in the deer in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I don't know about now. At some point, you had to show your deer to a game warden, and they would determine. Go ahead.
Yeah.
What was the disease at the one time?
Oh, in deer. It just happens in them. So if the warden would say, oh no, that deer does not look good, they would just take it away from you. Okay, you're not allowed to keep it. Okay? Yeah, you can tell from the animal from symptomatically, yes. Now, I find the discovery of that type of diseases very curious, because this is how prions were discovered. So there was a tribe of Aboriginal people in Papua New Guinea, and they had a lovely tradition. When the elderly passed away, in order to get the knowledge, the wisdom, they ate the brains. So some traditions are worth importing, I think. I think we're missing out. But they didn't realize that those elderly were passing away from that disease, and so they ate their brains, got the disease, passed away. Other people ate their brain, got the disease, and that was not looking, the future was not looking good for that tribe. And two American scientists, Prusiner and Gajdusek, they figured out that it's got to be something in the brain, and told those folks, got to stop. They did. The tribe was saved. Okay? So, let's move on to the spinal cord. So first of all, let's highlight what are the functions. So there are two main functions. We are going to focus on the second one, on the fact that spinal cord is the pathway to and from the brain. It also reflects center, but we're going to discuss reflexes when we talk about peripheral nervous system. So just like the brain, it is surrounded by 3 meninges. But unlike the brain, it has a vast amount of space above the dura mater, which you can see right here. So that space is the epidural space. I bet you all are familiar with epidural, because this is where anesthesia is. Huh? Yep. Kind of slowing down. Okay. Sorry, I just have to wait, because this whole thing is frozen now. Okay. Okay, let's take a look at this image once again, shall we? So this is epidural space. I really hope that. It's so annoying. I know what to do. Okay. You see? Still recording. Just spent like 5 minutes on bullshit. Okay. What I need to do is I need to close OneNote and I'm going to open it again. Because it usually helps. Okay, it did help. So let's go back to our conversation here. Okay.
How did you do that so I could do it? I said, how did you do that so I could do it?
What do you mean?
Make all them different pages.
I will talk about it after. Okay. Okay, let's continue talking about this. So, basically what I was trying to say all this time is that that space over here is the epidural space. This is, you see a lot of fat, so it's really good at absorbing drugs. So, you know, we get injections in there. So spinal cord does not extend all the way down to your pelvis. It actually ends at the level of about second, third lumbar vertebrae with a structure known as conus medullaris. Right before that, you can see so-called lumbar enlargement. Below the conus medullaris, spinal cord branches into a bunch of nerves that are called cauda equina, which can be literally translated from Latin as the horse tail. Now, since your spinal cord does not reach all the way down to your pelvis, it has to be secured to it. Otherwise, it would just dangle within the spinal column. So the securing part is carried out by that green structure called filum terminale, which attaches your spinal cord to the coccygeal bones of the pelvis, to your tailbones. Okay? So here you can see branches of cauda equina, conus medullaris, and the filum terminale in the actual cadaver image. Now, why I am paying so much attention to the fact that your spinal cord ends at around second lumbar vertebrae? Because taking the sample of cerebrospinal fluid is useful if somebody has some kind of neurological problem. Picking up cerebrospinal fluid from the subarachnoid space around the brain is very risky. It's much safer to stick the needle around the lumbar vertebrae number 3 or below, where there is no spinal cord to damage, just subarachnoid space. And you can carefully suck out some of that CSF and test it, because cerebrospinal fluid that circulates your brain and your spinal cord, it's all the same. Okay, now, what about other structures? So what I'm going to do, instead of just reading the text, I'm going to highlight main anatomical features if you don't mind. Okay? So let's take a look. First of all, this gray layer, thick layer, is dura mater. As we mentioned before, that fat-filled part right here is epidural space. It's a space between the dura mater and the bone of the vertebra. There's a very, 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 very thin space between the dura mater and arachnoid matter. So that light blue line is the arachnoid matter. You can also judge by these web-like projections that connect arachnoid matter to pia matter. The space between the pia matter and arachnoid matter is subarachnoid space, where cerebrospinal fluid is circulated and where we take the CSF sample from. Now, what about these nerve structures that get out of the spinal cord? So, remember, this is the posterior aspect. Okay. And this is the anterior aspect. So these extensions are the roots of the spinal nerves. This is the anterior root, and this is the posterior, well, anterior or ventral, posterior or dorsal. Why is it important? If you look at gray matter, this is gray matter, you may notice a couple of things here. First of all, you can see that your spinal cord is symmetrical. Okay? Can you acknowledge that? Yeah? Okay. Second, you may notice that your gray matter is organized, like interesting looking structure. I'm going to talk about just one side. Other side has exactly the same arrangement. So the gray matter has three horns. This is the ventral or the anterior horn. This is the dorsal or the posterior horn. And this is the lateral or, well, lateral horn. Always. Why is it important? When you start looking at the neurons that are commonly found in all these horns. So your anterior horn contains the, I'm going to use cell bodies. So cell bodies of the somatic motor neuron. The word somatic, what does it refer to? Somatic neurons, somatic motor neurons, what do they control? Say again? No, the opposite. Voluntary, so skeletal muscles, right? Your lateral horn contains cell bodies of visceral motor neurons, which control your involuntary responses, anything from heart to glands. And then dorsal horn contains the axons and cell bodies of sensory neurons, both somatic and visceral. Now, one may ask, I avoided the term cell bodies. So cell bodies of these sensory neurons are found in this structure. I'm going to show it over here because it's better. You see, these are cell bodies. So this is what's called a dorsal root ganglion, where the cell bodies are located. Okay? We are a little bit steering away from the spinal cord, but only for a short period of time. Look at the image. These all are the bodies of motor neurons. These motor neurons command your skeletal muscles, if they are somatic, or everything else, if they're visceral. So the signal goes from the central nervous system to whatever organs are being controlled. Would you agree with me? Now, in case of the sensory neurons, they bring the information into the CNS. So the signals through the dorsal root go towards the CNS. If you think about the whole function of the nervous system, it makes perfect sense. Our sensory signals have to reach CNS so we can make a decision, and our motor signals have to leave CNS and go to the effectors so we can execute that decision. So please know which types of neurons are located where. Okay? That makes sense? So it also shows you, that illustrates the idea that the spinal nerve is simply a two-way highway. It contains sensory fibers that go to CNS. It contains motor fibers that go out of CNS. So it brings us to this image. So this is just another sort of repetition of the structure. So I'm going to highlight some stuff here. I'm still trying to figure out which marker color would look better. So let's try green. So this is, oh, that's too much. This is dura mater, the outermost layer. Okay. Then we go with arachnoid matter. Now the space between arachnoid and dura mater is subdural space. This gray stuff is pia mater. Bring back red. So again, yeah, green's not great. Okay. So pia mater. The space between pia mater and arachnoid mater is subarachnoid space. Okay, sounds good? These are spinal nerves. Now, what you're looking at is the ventral or anterior view. So this, what you're looking at is front. So this is the anterior or ventral root. This is the posterior or dorsal root. This is the dorsal root ganglion. Now, what about these branches? These are called rootlets. You can only see the ventral rootlets, the rootlets of the ventral root, right? The rootlets here, the anterior rootlets. But there are posterior as well. Question?
The three things is pointing at 2013 Pearson education. What are those?
Say it again.
The three lines.
Oh, it's something is cut. This one, what this points at?
Them three, yes.
Yeah.
What are they?
So, okay.
They're not
So,
Pearson
okay, yes,
education.
yes. All right. So thank you for your question. I'll explain. So this arrow, and I'm going to give you the names. This is the dorsal median sulcus. Simply a groove, no functional importance. This chunk here, this is called the gray commissure. Okay, I think I misspelled commissure, but double M, but you get the gist, right? So this is the structure that connects left and right sides. This is the dorsal horn, and the rest is labeled. Okay? Now, last but not least, to not get you too confused. So, white matter, can you tell me what it consists of, if it's white? White matter, what forms, which parts of neurons form white matter? Myelinated axons. Myelinated axons that transmit the signal, right? So these white columns here, in this half, are called funiculi. So this is a dorsal funiculus. This is the lateral funiculus. And this is the ventral funiculus. Okay? Makes sense? We pretty much covered everything except for this little opening, which is a central canal through which cerebrospinal fluid circulates. So far, keeping up? So now we're going to talk about neuronal pathways. I have a quick question for you folks. Are there nerves in the central nervous system? No. Instead of nerves, we have pathways or tracts. Pathways and tracts carry the same meaning. Those are not different things, okay? So these pathways effectively provide the connection, delivering signals from the periphery of the body, so not CNS, to the brain. So here's my question. Let's say I touch something that is real hot with my fingers. So the signal is perceived by receptors in my fingers, right? And then it goes through the nerves to where? Spinal cord first. It goes to the spinal cord. And then spinal cord transmits that information to the brain. And spinal cord transmits that sensory information to the brain. Does it go up or down? Spinal cord to the brain. Up. So this is why the sensory pathways are ascending. Go up. When I form my decision what to do, let's say I'm deciding to keep holding that hot thing, whatever. Okay? So my brain, my motor cortex, sends signals to my muscles. But first, they have to go through the spinal cord. So the motor pathways are descending. Okay? There are transverse pathways, basically communicating from one side to another. We're not going to talk about them. But we are going to mention some unifying features. So, okay, white matter transmits. Does that make sense? It transmits the signal, whether it's sensory or motor. If it's a sensory signal, it has to be transmitted upwards in the ascending fashion to the brain. Does that make sense? If it's motor signal from your brain, it has to go down, it has to be descending through your spinal cord to your muscles. Right? So, pathways. Many of them, not all, many of them, decussate, meaning that they cross over from one side to another. That explains, why left side stroke results in right side paralysis and vice versa. they relay. All pathways consist of more than one neuron. They do exhibit somatotopy. Don't focus too much on that. And they are symmetrical. So if there is a pathway on the left side, exactly the same pathway on the right side. So let's take a look at those pathways. And I'm going to be very, very, very exact with what you need to know and things that you don't really have to pay attention to. Okay? So let's start with the ascending pathways, which are sensory. So we're going to trace that dark blue pathway on the right, which is called dorsal column, or medial lemniscal pathway, or dorsal white column. There are many names. I will clarify what you need to know exactly, but so far let's trace it, okay? So first we have a touch receptor, which sends the signal to the spinal cord. To which horn? Which is sensory horn? Dorsal. So it goes into the dorsal horn and may eventually go all the way up. It's all single neuron right about here. So this first neuron that goes from the receptor is called first order. Am I clear? Just first order neuron. Again, listen, anatomists have their own place in hell if it makes your life better. All the terminology that we use is the product of a bunch of nerds agreeing on things. So a bunch of nerds decided we're going to call them first, second, and third order neurons. That's it. That's the decision. The what? Oh, no. We'll get there. Give me a few minutes. I will explain exactly what you need to know. Okay? I'm explaining the concept of relay. So first order neuron, synapses, with the second order neuron, which goes all the way up to the thalamus, which serves as a relay. And in thalamus, the second order neuron forms a synapse with a third, which delivers the sensory information to your somatosensory cortex. Does that make sense? In a very sort of simplified way. First order, receptor to spinal cord. Second order, spinal cord to thalamus. Third order, thalamus to cortex. Now let's get to your question. First of all, do you need to know the specific differences between fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus? No. Okay? Do you need to know things like nucleus gracilis? No. As long as you can tell me, receptor to spinal cord to thalamus, thalamus to cortex, you good. Am I clear? Do know this term. It's also known as the dorsal white column. Okay? In terms of the function, type of signals that it conveys includes touch, pressure, limb position, joint position. Am I making sense? So I'm not going to ask you what is the function of funiculus gracilis, but I can ask you what type of signal does dorsal white column transmit? And you pick the answer that is either fine touch or pressure or position of the limbs and joints. You good? So what about two other ascending sensory pathway. So first of them is spinocerebellar. The interesting thing about spinocerebellar pathway is that you have no conscious awareness of what's going on. So look at the muscle. I'm not asking if you can know, like when you contract your muscle, you know that you do. Let me ask you a different thing. If you have a Charlie horse, do you know where it is? So the proprioceptors, or let's do it differently. So imagine you are blindfolded and somehow, without touching your skin, your leg is being stretched. Can you feel it? Yes. So these proprioceptors, the receptors that sense the position, in your, for example, muscles that can be joined, they send the signal first to the spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. So name of the pathway makes sense. It's spino, spine, cerebellar, from the spine to the cerebellum, ascending pathway that transmits proprioception. Okay? Now, again, to clarify, origin, absolutely no. Final destination, yes. Location, no. Type of signal, yes. Details about decussation, no. So we just talked about dorsal white column that conveys things like touch and, pressure, things like that. Are those the only sensory experiences that we can have? What else, in addition to touch and pressure? No. Somatic sensations. Temperature and, really important, huh? Pain. So we never mentioned temperature or pain, because temperature and pain are conveyed by spinothalamic pathway. So I'm going to use actually the temperature part. So you see that there's a receptor here. That's a bit of a torture. Causing a match to somebody's toes, But that sensation, first order neurons, transmitted to the spinal cord, dorsal horn again. All of it comes through the dorsal horn. Am I making sense? First synapse with a second order neuron, and the second order neuron goes all the way up. I don't know what just happened. Well, I know what just happened. Okay? All the way up to the thalamus, hence spinothalamic. And then it doesn't stop there, and the third order neuron reaches the cortex. So, in summary, dorsal white column and spinothalamic pathway consist of 3 neurons. First, transmits touch, pressure, position. Second, transmits pain and temperature. All those signals eventually go to the somatosensory cortex. Spinocerebellar pathway, body position, 2 neurons to the cerebellum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I have a question.
Yes.
So what part of that function is not working when you don't feel it? Like, say somebody burning themselves but they don't feel it. What part of that is not working?
Can be anything. Can be transaction in the spinal cord, so second order neuron is damaged. Okay. Can be cortex affected by a stroke. Okay. So can be neural deterioration in the periphery, like that little guy, like somebody has leprosy. Okay. Nerves die off, the neurons die off, you just don't have temperature receptors. Okay. I hope I answered your question. Just like with spinocerebellar, no questions about location, origin, destination cortex, functions, yes. You don't need to distinguish lateral and ventral. Just pain temperature. Descending pathways, motor. So this is the most important. It's corticospinal. Think about the name again. Cortex to the spine. So what is happening here? We're going to look at the bright red guy. This fellow. So this neuron goes all the way down. All the way down. It is descending. Then it crosses on to the other side. Remember, left side controls the right side and vice versa. And forms a synapse with another neuron that reaches the muscle and commands it. Reasonable? So now this neuron that's like on top is called upper motor neuron. Does that make sense? Now, the neuron that is here, that connects to the muscle, connects spinal cord to the muscle, is called lower motor neuron, which kind of makes sense. Now, why this is important, and really clinically important, I'm going to demonstrate it to you. So, your skeletal muscles that you use to move, they can only be activated. Let me explain. Muscle can be at the baseline, or it can contract. Does that make sense? Unlike a neuron that you can actively inhibit. You cannot inhibit a muscle. So, lower motor neurons, or I'm going to use the acronym, pretty common, LMNs, are all excitatory. So if a lower motor neuron, hear me out, that's clinically important, as you will see in a minute. If lower motor neuron is firing, it activates the muscle and it contracts. If it doesn't fire, muscle relaxes. Okay? That's it. But why wouldn't it fire in some circumstances? Because upper motor neurons can be excitatory or inhibitory. Now let me show to you why this is important. Here we go. So imagine that this is the lower motor neuron. Is it excitatory or inhibitory? Excitatory. Now, when will it fire? When the upper motor neuron, also excitatory, will stimulate it. But when it will not fire? When the upper motor neuron, that's inhibitory, will block it, right? So, fire, no fire. Okay? That makes sense? Like, imagine that the only thing that I can do in life is to dig a ditch. So, if one person tells me, go dig a ditch, I'm going to be digging it until somebody else comes to me and says, don't. Then I stop. So me digging a ditch is the lower motor neuron. Are you familiar with a disease called tetanus? Tetanus. Tetanus, lockjaw. In tetanus, the function of inhibitory upper motor neurons is whacked. So the only signal that reaches your muscles is excitatory signal. You cannot relax your muscles. This is why it's spastic paralysis. Okay? Does that make sense? So, what specifically you need to focus on when you think about corticospinal tract? Well, not the location, not the difference between lateral and ventral, not the origin, the functions. So you need to know that corticospinal tract or pathway is descending, and that it conveys voluntary, signals to voluntarily contract your muscles. These are 4 other ones, so the only thing you need to focus on seriously are their functions. So for tectospinal, it's your visual reflex. You turn your neck to follow the object. Vestibulospinal is charged with the maintenance of balance and posture. And these two, rubrospinal and reticulospinal, aren't particularly precise. They're pretty crude. For the most part, it's muscle tone maintenance. Right? Muscle tone. Just because your muscles are constantly a little bit contracted. Okay. So spinal cord injury, depending on which horn is affected, can cause paralysis or paresthesia. Paralysis is the absence of movement. Paresthesia is the absence of sensations, because you asked, signal doesn't go through. Okay? So if ventral horn is damaged, you can't move because ventral horn contains somatic motor neurons. Okay? Now, depending on the damage to a particular motor neuron, you can have 2 syndromes, upper and lower motor syndrome. So upper UMN syndrome usually results in hypotonia, spinal shock, basically temporary paralysis. Okay? If it is not restored, and by restored I mean just if your spine doesn't recover from the shock, spasticity, just like we talked about, upper motor neurons, the inhibitory ones are damaged, so your muscles cannot relax. Usually it results in hypertonias. Lower motor neuron syndrome, paralysis, and loss of muscle tone. So that's classical symptoms of transection of the spinal cord, which you can see here. Now, depending on the level, people who suffer from spinal cord injury are classified into quadriplegics or paraplegics. So quadriplegia is caused by the resection in the cervical region, upper thoracic to some extent. So quadriplegia is not yes or no. There can be different degrees of it. I happened to know 2 people I knew pretty closely, people with quadriplegia, and I tangentially knew another person also with quadriplegia, but at the very upper level. So that one person had an injury around first cervical vertebrae, so this person was almost completely paralyzed below the neck, just few movements of fingers, so he had to operate a fully motorized wheelchair.
Yeah.
Other two people had a fair amount of control over their arms. Like they could drive a car, shoot a gun, use a regular wheelchair. They had some fine motor deficiencies in their fingers that would not be, like violin players, but pretty okay.
So why was they not considered a paraplegic if they had usable for their arms?
Usable but not fully functional.
Oh, but they weren't.
People who are paraplegic have full function of their arms. Okay? Now, what about pathologies? That's the last thing that we're going to talk about. So, polio. Folks, the reason why I picked it and decided not to talk about transverse myelitis is because I love microbiology and viruses. Polio has a not too much, but kind of triumphant comeback in the United States. Poliovirus is now isolated in the wastewater in many locations in the US. It's transmitted when people drink water, accidentally consume it, and it infects first guts, and then in 1 out of 100 cases it moves into the neurons and reaches the spinal cord and destroys... Do I have it here? No, I don't have it saying here, but what it does, it basically kills lower motor neurons. And just like this kid, people develop full or partial paralysis, usually in the lower limbs. Okay?
So they can't catch, nobody can catch polio now, right?
Let me answer your question in a second when I will just another illustration. Remember how we linked dysfunction and function and symptoms. Ventral horn contains motor neurons that control your muscles. If you destroy ventral horn with all those neurons, you can't control your muscles. Depending on which ventral horn is destroyed, you lose control over a certain group of muscles. Okay? Usually legs, because gut is low and it will be like somewhere in lumbar thoracic area, but it can get up high and people can have diaphragm paralyzed, and then they have to be on iron lung because they cannot independently breathe. Now, to your question, can we catch polio? Yes, we can. I hope that everybody in this room is vaccinated, though. Okay? Vaccine, polio vaccine that is administered in the United States is 100% safe and 100% effective against disease. You can get infected, but you're not going to get paralyzed. Okay? Does that make sense?
And that's the vaccine you get from birth to like 5 or something.
Yeah, it's, well, fairly early. It's what's called an activated polio vaccine. Yeah.
They wouldn't vaccinate.
Are they from...
They older though, so they wasn't, when they came around, they didn't get vaccinated.
So the vaccine in the United States was introduced in 1953 by Jonas Salk. And if you're older than that, public pools were closing over the summer due to polio outbreaks. If you read the story, thousands of kids died every year of polio. So people lined up for blocks to get the vaccine. And you know who were first people who received the vaccine? It was Jonas Salk himself, his wife, and his children. Like, when he made the vaccine, there were test subjects. They were first test subjects. Okay? So again?
Jerry's kids. From back in the day. For polio.
No.
Specifically for polio.
No. Yeah, yeah. No, it was a huge problem, and it shouldn't be anymore, but it still is. And we're not going to discuss a variety of reasons. Anti-vax movement is one of them, obviously. So another condition, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Stephen Hawking is the poster child. He's not a child anymore, he's dead actually. Nobody knows why it happens. Okay? Unlike, autism that's caused by Tylenol, as we all know. So it's a slow deterioration of ventral horns. Again, ventral horns control your muscle movements. You don't have ventral horns, the muscles don't move. Am I making sense? Okay. Usually, people die within 5 years of onset. This gentleman was kicking until, I think he passed away when he was 73. While, yeah, maybe even less than that. But an interesting fact, which I think interesting fact, is that when he already was sick, when he had ALS, he divorced his first wife, married his second wife. Yes, and had a couple of kids. So that was not a skeletal muscle.
No, it was not.
Okay, it was not. Now, another condition that is a spinal cord, it's a spinal cord abnormality. I find it fascinating. Is the improper development of the neural tube. When we are embryos and our organ systems start to develop, they develop as a neural tube. The cranial end becomes brain, everything else becomes spinal cord. There are some conditions that I want you to know and understand. One is anencephaly. Okay? This?
I want to know what that third one is. That's common.
Craniorachisisis?
People with knots on their head. That is very common.
With what?
Knots.
Oh, this?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. So you don't need to memorize the impronounceable term for this. So basically, this is the failure to form cranium and vertebral column. The brain and the spinal cord are open. Oh, pretty soon, yeah. So I'm not going to highlight it. Anencephaly, failure to basically develop the brain. These infants are born alive physiologically, but die pretty soon. I checked how long was the survival, the longest. It was 2 years and 10 months. I genuinely don't understand why keeping the body functioning, because it's not going to get any better. That's it. We're done here. I do not have an answer to your question because I don't know. Maybe I don't know if this condition can be determined early enough to terminate the pregnancy. So it may be too late, and the woman has to give birth, okay? Which I cannot even fathom what kind of experience the woman would go through in this case. So anencephaly. So always think about the name. Anencephaly. An means no, encephaly means brain. And encephalocoeli. Encephalo refers to brain. Coeli is a protrusion, increase in some kind of a vessel. So basically, you have a hernia of meninges, which, as you can imagine, impairs the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid and can have some negative effects on brain development or even lead to hydrocephalus. Huh?
Why don't they remove that?
All right, folks, so we got stopped right here. So in addition to anencephaly and encephalocoeli, a couple more things that you need to know. First of all, you need to know 3 different types of spina bifida. One of them is spina bifida occulta. So see what happens. The vertebrae fails to properly form, and the part of the spinal cord is not protected. Okay? Spina bifida occulta, the term occulta means hidden, so it is asymptomatic. However, if the person gets hit or has some kind of a mechanical impact, it may lead to spinal shock. I witnessed it in a 9-year-old kid during a football game. He recovered, had spina bifida occulta in a very unusual place, had spina bifida occulta in the cervical area. So he missed one vertebrae entirely in his neck. He was 9 and they didn't know about that. Okay? So then, meningocele. As we mentioned, cele is a protrusion. Right? So, meningocele is the protrusion of meninges, very similar to encephalocele. The difference is where it is. Encephalocele is the meningeal protrusion around the brain. Meningocele is meningeal protrusion around the spinal cord. You can imagine that the flow of cerebrospinal fluid is impaired, which may result in conditions like hydrocephaly. However, you also can see that the spinal cord itself remains somewhat intact, which is not the case with myelomeningocele. So in these cases, you can see spinal cord is open, it actually sticks out, and it is bent. So there is a protrusion of meninges and the spinal cord. That obviously is much more severe condition potentially. It can lead to paralysis, loss of bladder and GI function. That's that. Okay? All right, so